Greetings everyone, I'm Prince B, and today we're going to keep talking about Yokai Watch. Last time we discussed the animated version, but today we're going to be taking a look at the thing that started it all, the game.
And why am I still here?
Who cares? Let's get started.
Prologue. Background information. Yokai Watch is a game developed by Level 5 for the Nintendo 3DS in 2013 and released in the Americas in 2015. It also has a planned release for Europe sometime in 2016. Level 5 is famous for a variety of other well-received games, such as Professor Layton, Fantasy Life, and Dragon Quest VIII? Another time. It is an RPG in which you attempt to befriend spirits known as yokai to earn their medals and use them in battle. Wait a minute, Prince B. Running around collecting monsters and battling them? This is exactly like Pokemon. Now, hold on. To be fair, there are a lot of yokai that are similar to existing Pokemon, that were, in turn, inspired by folktales of said yokai. But that's not either series' fault. They aren't actively copying each other. That's like saying since Harvest Moon and Animal Crossing are both life sims with animals and trees, one is copying the other, while anyone who's played them will tell you that couldn't be farther from the truth. Yes, they have similarity, but to call it a clone without any merits of its own is pretty harsh. As for what yokai are, they're essentially Japanese spirits. I gave a slightly more in-depth description in my Yokai Watch anime review, so check there if you want to know more. Despite being a fairly new series, Yokai Watch has achieved quite a bit of success in Japan, spawning merchandise, an animated series, a movie, and even manga. All of this from one game? Is this game really worthy of all this, or was it a fluke? Let's find out. Chapter 1. Story and Characters. The game takes place in the town of Springdale, and starts off much like the anime, but with a few key differences. While I already talked about most of this, I'll go ahead and summarize the highlights here. After selecting to play as a boy or a girl, you go hunting for bugs for a summer project. You find an old capsule machine from which you free a spirit known as Whisper, who acts as your butler and guide to the world of yokai. He then gives you the Yokai Watch, a device that allows you to interact with the spirits, and teaches you to battle and befriend yokai. I'd like to take a moment to point out a glaring plot hole. If Whisper was trapped for over 100 years, how did he get the watch if it was made in the past 50 years? It's not a huge deal, just something I noticed that they could have done a better job explaining. Anyway, you return home to find your parents fighting. Whisper declares it the work of a yokai, and you attempt to get her to leave. Realizing your current yokai aren't strong enough, you leave to befriend new ones, and eventually oust the yokai inspiriting your parents. After a little bit of experience dealing with yokai in daily life, one called Tattletale tells you of a strange man who was attempting to tamper with seals that were keeping the mystical energy of your town in check, and you go off to investigate. That's all I'm going to say about the main plot in the interest of spoilers. The plot is divided into chapter-like segments. In addition to that main plot, there are various other subplots about happenings in your daily life surrounding friends and family members. While it breaks up the story, which isn't great, it does help to give more insight into the world and help flesh things out. It's just a shame that, as a result, the story feels kind of crammed in at the end. That's about all the time we have for this segment, so next let's discuss the game's presentation. Chapter 2. Graphics and Audio. From a graphical standpoint, everything looks wonderful. The game has so many minor details. For instance, the windows in the background change to reflect if it's raining. That's a great level of attention to detail. In terms of sound, the background music is, as I mentioned in the anime review that uses many of these tracks, simply great. It lends itself well to the game's wonderful atmosphere. While it could use some extra tracks to help with variety, what is there is great. Speaking of the anime, the game uses the same VAs for the English dub for the cutscenes and the yokai's names that they say after you befriend them. While the main characters, Whisper, and some of the others are really good, some of these are really bad. Obviously, since the English dub only had a few episodes out when I reviewed it, I didn't know the full scope of some of the voice acting. But now that I do, I have to say some of it is kind of cringeworthy. And the game kind of suffers because of this, clearly showing how it's aimed more at children rather than a more general audience. And I'd also recommend watching the anime in Japanese, if this is a preview of what we have to look forward to in future episodes. Okay, that's a bit of a tangent. Let's get back on track with the game itself. Chapter 3. Gameplay. Right away, the game features 3 files, which is great for replay purposes. You can also select between a male and female character to play as, and name them. From there you start, and the game teaches you the basics as you go along, and does a much better job than the demo version. As such, and in the interest of time, I'll mostly skip over the instructions, but I will say that maneuvering the overworld is pretty easy, and you can interact with a variety of objects and NPCs. There's even a little stamina meter a la Skyward Sword, and you can search for insects and fish, which are caught off a random spinner, and can be traded in for items. The bulk of the game, though, is of course the yokai. There are, as stated in the English version of the anime opening, more yokai than taters in Idaho. Yeah, that may be a bit of an exaggeration. I'm also not sure when potatoes became a valid way to quantify things, but let's roll with it. There are, in this game, a total of 223 yokai to befriend, which is decidedly less than the number of potatoes in Idaho. Unfortunately, a lot of them are palette swaps. While some do have actual different features on the models, most are just the same with different colors, which, while it's a common thing in RPGs, strikes me as kind of lazy, and especially not good when the monsters make up your party as opposed to being random enemies you just fight. And some of these are admittedly pretty stupid looking. I mean, this is a shoe with human arms and legs. What is this? While some of the names are pretty good puns, some of the names are laughably bad, like Bad Dude and Dragon Lord and Lava Lord. Wow, this game has more lords than Fire Emblem. Taking something and slapping Lord on the end doesn't make it cooler, and it definitely doesn't make for a good name. Each yokai belongs to one tribe, each of which excel at doing different things. Some are better at attacking, while others are healers. They also each have an ability and 4 moves for battles, but you can't select them as they're each specific to that yokai species, which is a bit of a shame. They also each have a rank, which gives a general indication of their power level. Many lower ranked yokai can evolve into new, more powerful yokai, but before you go complaining about Pokemon, while some of these do evolve by level, the more common method is by fusion, in which you combine 2 yokai or a yokai and an item. On the topic of fusion, this actually reminds me less of Pokemon and more of an old game, Shaman King Sprinting Wolf and Soaring Hawk on Game Boy Advance, where it is also featured prominently. Just an interesting little tidbit. In terms of encountering yokai, outside of dungeons, you'll encounter yokai by following the meter on your yokai watch to various areas such as trees, telephone poles, and under cars. Then by interacting with them, you'll be given a closer view of that area and can search for them with the yokai watch's lens. Keeping the yokai in the lens's focus for a certain amount of time will reveal them and allow you to battle them. Battles are usually 3-on-3, with 3 of your 6 fighting at once against foes, though some stronger foes and bosses will fight your team of 3 alone. Your yokai team appear on the bottom wheel, and can be switched throughout the battle by spinning the wheel. Further, the yokai will fight on their own. You don't get to control them. With that said though, there's plenty for you to do. In addition to switching your team lineup to better suit the situation, you can aid the battle in other ways. First is items, which allow you to use food to heal an ally, or throw it at a foe in an attempt to recruit them. More on that in a bit. Next is targeting, which allows you to pin an enemy and have your yokai target that foe in particular, and becomes increasingly important the further you go, especially against bosses. Lastly are the Sultimate moves and Purification, both of which require you to follow a simple prompt on the bottom screen. Purification removes an enemy in spirit, which functions as a status ailment and can only be performed on a yokai in the back row, while Sultimate is a super move and can only be utilized by a yokai in the front. Even though they're super moves, you can't just rely on Sultimates in a pinch, since they require the commands and take a while to execute even after completing the prompts. This is good as it means you have to plan out what you're doing in advance. Further, the fact that battles are automated is a double-edged sword. On one side, you're constantly doing something as opposed to pressing a button and waiting. On the other, it makes it a bit hard to truly strategize as you don't have full control of the yokai. There's a lot going on at once. It sounds complicated at first, but it's pretty easy to pick up. Also, there are books which can influence your yokai to behave a certain way in battle, such as focusing on healing or inspiriting enemies, or making them attack or defend more often. It's a pretty interesting system, though it may not appeal to everyone. As I briefly mentioned, you can feed foes to befriend them. Unfortunately, by far the biggest problem with the game is befriending yokai, which, in addition to being vital for building a team, is also necessary for a number of side quests which require specific spirits. The befriending mechanic is really random and really bad. Each yokai has a different eagerness to befriend, which can't be viewed in game, similar to a Pokemon's capture rate, but usually much lower. You can improve this by feeding a yokai food once per battle, with a favored food item having more of an effect. For instance, Manjimut likes Chinese food, but all the food isn't equal. Harder to find and more expensive food will work better than cheaper ones. And of course, the game doesn't tell you or even keep track of what foods each one likes, so it's trial, error, and memorization. While that's the main way of improving the odds, you can raise it a bit by other ways. Having a yokai with the ability Popularity can improve the recruit rate slightly, as can hitting the random wisps which appear in battle. But even with all of this, the odds still tend to be fairly low, and is very frustrating, especially since you won't know whether or not you recruit the yokai till after the battle, and you may befriend one you didn't even want. It's easily the game's biggest turnoff. Befriending yokai can be just as difficult as making friends in real life. Friendships take work, and art imitates life. This does, however, make befriending a yokai you've been working on befriending for a while all the more rewarding, but usually not enough to balance the frustration. I've also heard this has been improved in the sequel, but I obviously can't confirm it unless we see it released outside of Japan. That is, of course, not the only flaw. Far from it. While most of them are minor compared to the befriending mechanic, I'm going to have a lightning round where I outline the ones I disliked the most here. The game really likes to hold your hand at times, which is understandable given the target demographic, and it likes to pop up the objective every time you stop moving, as well as having a marker on the map on the bottom screen. You can disable the marker though via the settings, so that's rather minor. On the opposite end of the spectrum though, the game can be really cryptic at parts. For the Rank A watch quest, you have to find a specific sewer entrance amongst many littered throughout the city. The specific one is through a pipe that's almost under a bridge, and the game doesn't give any indication that you can crawl through it, and is one of the few times an entrance to another area isn't marked on the map. And the objective marker won't tell you to go here either, since it's counted as a side quest and not a main objective, even though it's necessary to complete the story. Another example is that a side quest requires you to climb a vine to reach another floor of a building. The vine looks like a part of the background, and once again the map gives no indication you can move to another area from here. It's the only part of the game that does, as the other areas you can climb ropes have it clearly indicated on the map. That's just two examples. Most of the crypticness comes from side quests, which are optional, but it's still there and it's still really annoying. On the topic of cryptic randomness, there are rare drops from certain yokai. But I'm okay with that. That's pretty much an RPG staple. Instead, for quests, they need a rare drop item, but don't tell you what enemy or even area to look in. The quest didn't even tell me I needed an item to begin with. A minor complaint is that I can't go wherever. While this helps you not to get overwhelmed by too many locations at once, the reasoning is pretty stupid. Also, it's obviously not so you don't encounter strong yokai before you're ready, as it's linked to your watch's rank, not the location. This makes it feel like I'm not upgrading my watch because I want to, but because I'm being forced to, which isn't fun. And there are a few areas with puzzles that aren't really puzzles, more like short mazes that don't really take any effort, which is kind of unfortunate because it could have been very interesting. Lastly, a lot of the quests feel kind of stale, more like fetch quests than anything else. It's still fun and helps flesh out the world, but it's worth pointing out that it can get kind of repetitive. Again, most of these are minor complaints, but are worth mentioning. That pretty much sums up my lightning round of complaining, so let's move on. On the positive side, the game's humor is pun-bearable, having a ton of puns for the characters' names. Overall, the humor is really good. In addition to a lot of puns, it loves to break the fourth wall and share some of the animation's off-the-wall randomness. And it even has much less of a reliance on toilet humor, which is great in my book. The game also makes usage of a wide variety of features, such as Street Pass, QR codes, and a password system for extra content. And while there is some local multiplayer, it's pretty limited. And no, you cannot trade yokai. I mean, that'd go against the theme of friendship. You can't trade friends. Speaking of themes, let's take a look at some. Chapter 4, Ideas and Themes. Without spoiling things too much, I'll outline a few of the prominent themes here. First, Yokai Watch is a great throwback to the old days where people attempted to rationalize and explain what was at the time unexplainable. Not only that, but it applies even to childhood in general, where many experiences are new and scary and you're just trying to figure things out. It's a pretty universal experience in that regard. Another theme is choosing to coexist with those different from you in harmony. Even if we're not the same, we all want to live our lives peacefully. This is important to remember, especially in these modern times. Of course, there will be conflict that arises from different ways of living, but we should try and work things out civilly as best we can. The game also teaches us we really shouldn't jaywalk, at least until we're like level 40. Final chapter, Verdict. Yokai Watch has unique gameplay and beautiful graphics, and the sound is really good too for the most part. The story isn't the most coherent, and it's got a lot of problems, but I don't think they're enough to warrant not giving the game a chance. Further, it's oddly nostalgic. I don't mean the game itself, but the concept of not understanding why certain things happen and trying to find a way to rationalize it, even if it's nonsensical to everyone else. Yokai Watch receives a happy ending. If you're looking for Pokemon, you're not gonna find it. But if you keep an open mind, you just might like Yokai Watch. Yes, the similarities are there, but I'd say Yokai Watch is to Pokemon as dogs are to wolves. There are recognizable things in common, but it's still clearly different enough to be its own thing. Again, it has its flaws, yes, but did I enjoy it despite them? Well, I've logged over 100 hours across 2 playthroughs already, so I'd say yes. Yes, I have.
So that's Yokai Watch, the game. Next time, join me as we...
He just keeps going on and on. Could this too be the work of a yokai?
A yokai is why. Go on, get out of here. Shoot, shoot. What was I doing?
Never mind that.
We'll see you all next time.
Thanks for watching as always. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, and consider subscribing to stay up to date on future content. And if you haven't already, check out my Yokai Watch anime review.